This is Mike Donnelly, Senior Counsel with HSLDA. One of my favorite presidents was Ronald Reagan, and he has a pretty famous quote, which I like a lot, where he said, "Freedom is only one generation away from extinction. It is not something that we pass on to our children in the bloodstream, but rather it is handed down, and each generation must defend its freedom to pass on to the next generation." I think this is particularly true in homeschooling. And as we see around us, concerns about loss of freedoms, whether it's civil liberties or different areas where we feel that our freedoms are being restricted and our ability to make our own choices are restricted, we need to remember that freedom is not free. Freedom is purchased with effort, with attention, with organization, with the work of citizens in a country like ours where we live, a republic. A country that is founded on the idea of governing by the consent of the people, meaning that we, the people, are ultimately the governing authority. In that kind of a country, we have a responsibility to work for and preserve our freedom now and for future generations. And if we fail to do that, then we fail to preserve the freedom and pass it on to our children and their grandchildren. If we are concerned about these issues of freedom, if we are concerned about our liberty, then we have to do something about it. We have to support organizations. We have to get involved. We have to perhaps even step up and run for office. We have to support those who agree with our vision for a society in which government is best, which governs least. The right to homeschool is based on the presumption that parents have a fundamental right to direct the education of their children. It is important that as a community we support this fundamental right and that we work to ensure that government respects that right. We can do that by supporting the passage of laws that respect this right, by supporting the election of citizens to legislatures and to judgeships and to positions of authority who respect this right. The right to homeschool is founded on this notion that parents make decisions that are in the best interest of their children, that parents are preeminent in the lives of their children. And if we lose this idea in our society, if this idea that government can intrude, invade, make better decisions, should be making better decisions, then ultimately this idea of parental rights will be undermined, it will fail, and homeschooling will fall. Homeschooling has thrived in the United States where there is a culture of respect for difference, where there is a culture of respect for individual liberty, where the right of parents to make decisions for their children has been respected at all levels of government. It's recognized by our Supreme Court. Many state Supreme Courts have also recognized this right, and our laws also respect and recognize this right. But that is not the case in many other countries, particularly in countries in Europe and in other Western countries, where parents are viewed more with suspicion than with respect. What you see in these countries, especially as it relates to homeschooling, and this has been a tragic development over the last 10 years, as the pendulum of freedom swings in the wrong direction, we find that in countries like the United Kingdom, even, a country that is much more closely aligned with ours in terms of its ideas of respect for parental liberty, even there is a pressure being brought to bear on parents, on homeschoolers, where government is seeking to impose more restrictions and more burdens. You see that not only in homeschooling, but even in the area of private education, where the National Department for Education in the United Kingdom has gone after and closed down schools, Christian schools, where inspectors determined that they didn't like the values that were being taught by these Christian schools. And these were basic Christian values. We're not talking about crazy ideas here. What we've seen in the United Kingdom is efforts by the Department for Education, the education bureaucrats, to seek to impose additional, I would suggest unreasonable restrictions on homeschooling families, seeking to have them register their existence, looking to have the authorities have more control and more supervision over what's happening in those families who are choosing to home educate their children. This is not the tradition of home education in the United Kingdom, which has been free for many decades, but that is what's happening in recent years. We see this in other countries in Europe, countries such as France, which recently passed laws to change the recognition that homeschooling was a right. France passed a law in 2021 changing its 1882 recognition of homeschooling as a right to now require that parents seek permission from local authorities to be able to homeschool their children for limited reasons. A huge change. Countries like Germany and Sweden are notorious for their bans and persecution of families who want to homeschool their children. In Sweden, families flee the country to neighboring Finland. German families have to leave their country if they want to be able to freely homeschool their children. And with regulation increasing all over Europe, these German families now have fewer places to go to in Europe. The pendulum of freedom in Europe is swinging in the wrong direction. The concern I have about that is that there are many in this country, in the United States, who look at Europe and say, yeah, we should do things that way. Well, in the area of homeschooling, if they point at Europe, that's going to be bad for us. So we have got to stand with and for this freedom. We have an obligation to help those in other countries, in Germany, in Sweden, in Portugal, in the United Kingdom, in France, to try to help these small communities of homeschoolers who are fighting for their freedom. Because when we fight for their freedom, we're actually also fighting for our freedom. As the pendulum of freedom swings in the wrong direction in some places like Europe, we find that there are some bright spots in homeschooling freedom around the world, with the continent of Africa, Central and South America, where there are countries who are debating and even passing laws that recognize the right of parents to be able to homeschool. Some of these laws passed, for example, in Panama, may be a little bit more restrictive than the kinds of laws we would see on average in the United States, but it is still encouraging to see that in some countries, policymakers are recognizing that homeschooling is a legitimate option that parents must be permitted to have. In fact, I would go so far as to say that homeschooling should be considered a human right. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights in Article 26(3) says that parents have a prior right to decide the kind of education that their children should receive. Prior meaning prior to the state. Even though the Declaration also recognizes that education is a right, it recognizes that parents have the preeminent place in making the decision about what kind of education their children receive. You know, it's also interesting that in the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, it recognizes that families are the fundamental group unit of society. The Charter for European Freedom recognizes that parents actually have a right to have their religious, philosophical, and pedagogical convictions respected. Now, we see in these countries that there are these treaties and these rights, but yet we see government action to foreclose or to restrict these rights, which is why it's so important for us to advocate. And we can look to these treaties for support and point out to these governments that if they are unreasonably constraining or prohibiting parents from choosing homeschooling or other educational options, that they are actually interfering with the rights of these parents. So it's a very chilling environment in these countries. And you see this particularly in Europe, where there are very strong government agencies, child welfare agencies, and laws that give the government a lot of power. In these countries, families who want to do something different face a stark choice. They either choose to submit or they have to leave. And in some cases, if they can't leave and they won't submit, they are subject to very harsh treatment. These families who are targeted, who face this kind of persecution, face a reality that we probably have a hard time imagining in our country, because we could always move to another state if we want to. But in Europe, you don't have a lot of choices like that. And so in Europe, it's hard for people to leave their country. And so if they can't leave, they are stuck. I'm reminded of the story of Jonas Himmelstrand of Sweden. Jonas is a friend of mine and was one of the founders of an organization that I work with, the Global Home Education Exchange Council, a global network designed to support the growth of homeschooling freedom by helping homeschool organizations in other countries get started and connecting leaders and advocating for good policy. And Jonas and his family were in Sweden homeschooling their children, one of whom had some special learning needs and just wasn't doing well in school. Jonas was faced with court action from the local authorities who refused after a while to give him permission to homeschool. Ultimately, Jonas had to make the choice. He either had to leave Sweden or give up his right to homeschool and do what was best for his children. He had to move his family. You see similar stories like this. In Germany, the Romeike family, who HSLDA represented in an attempt to gain political asylum, were being faced with persecution from authorities who were sending the police to their house to take their children to school, who were threatening more significant action. And in Germany, what that means is taking children away from parents. The Romeike family were not going to give in to that, and so they left everything they had in Germany. Mr. Romeike was a piano teacher. He left his piano. They left their family, their friends, their home to come to the United States. They got on an airplane with only their suitcases and came here not knowing what the future would hold. But families in Europe, like the Himmelstrands, like the Romeikes, face these stark choices, and they should not. Homeschooling is a right. It is a fundamental and natural right. It is a human right that all governments must respect and must acknowledge. And that's something that I work on every day. That's what HSLDA is striving for here and abroad, to protect that freedom. And that freedom to homeschool is essential in a free society. Any society that persecutes or denigrates parents in making choices about their children's education is not a free society, cannot be called a free society. Ultimately, the person, the institution that controls children controls the future of society. So when you look at the classrooms of today, you see the courtrooms and the corporations of tomorrow. That's why education decision-making and who gets to decide about education is so important. You know, the way you pass laws in any country that has any kind of democratic system is you influence policymakers. And that's what we see happening. We see homeschool organizations growing. We see homeschool organizations getting started in other countries. And they are beginning the process, in some cases advancing the process, to make their argument that homeschooling should be protected, that parents must be recognized in making these decisions. When we look back at our own history, the history of our country, I like to think about Samuel Adams. And he was quoted as saying, "It doesn't take a majority to prevail, but only a tireless minority willing to set brush fires in the minds of their neighbors." Well, that's what we did as a homeschooling movement here in the United States. We worked tirelessly with individuals, state organizations, homeschool support groups, HSLDA, working together to influence legislators, to pass good laws, to advocate in courts, and to never give up. My message is to the homeschoolers in other countries and even here in our own country, we cannot give up. We must continue working to preserve freedom and to advance freedom. Because if you're not moving forward, you're falling behind. We always have to be working, because those who oppose our ideas, those who would seek to restrict our decision making and do what's best for our children, they're not stopping. They continue to work all the time. So that means we also have to work. And so what you can do as a homeschool family, as a homeschool parent, maybe you're not involved in an organization, maybe you're not in a support group, but you can step up. Maybe you can step up and exercise leadership and start a support group, or contribute and volunteer on the board of your support group, or get involved in your state organization, or run for office and exercise decision making to preserve and protect the freedom that you believe is so precious, as we do. Together, we can make homeschooling freely available, freely accessible to as many people as possible. In fact, that's our mission at HSLDA, is to make homeschooling possible. We want to make it possible for everyone, everywhere, because we believe in homeschooling. We believe that parents investing in their children, choosing to homeschool their children, is a blessing. It's a blessing for the family. It's a blessing for the child. It creates strong families, it creates strong communities, and strong communities create strong countries. Homeschooling is good for countries. Homeschooling allows children to flourish. It allows children the opportunity to experience freedom to learn, freedom to explore, freedom to find out how they're made, who they're designed to be, in a way that isn't possible in other modes of education. Homeschooling allows parents the kind of influence that results in children who are confident, who are forgiving, who are purposeful in life. Children who are comfortable with who they are because they've been able to discover that for themselves. When you have families, strong families, and a family can be strong even if there's only one parent. You know, there's lots of different kinds of families in the world. Children can flourish, children can thrive when parents are investing in them and they feel secure in their family. Freedom is about being free to pursue your dream. And that's what homeschooling allows parents to do for their children. And if we have a society of citizens who respect freedom, who respect individual decision making, who respect parents to be able to make these decisions, then we're going to have a free society. And we're not going to have to worry about tyranny. When you look at the research that's been done on homeschooling, it shows that homeschooled children become forgiving, giving, mature, confident, secure adults. They become people who embrace civil liberties for everyone, even those with whom they disagree. So as homeschoolers, we embrace civil liberty, and our kids have caught this, and that's what this research shows. And so we respect that. And so when we have a society made up of people who respect the civil liberties of other people, we're going to have a free society. Well, I am very hopeful for the future. We see in the United States of America and in other countries all over the world growing homeschooling communities. What that tells me is that parents have decided that they are going to act, that they are going to take control of their children's future, and they are going to invest in that future. They are going to work to make homeschooling freely available and accessible in their countries. And that's going to be difficult. In some countries, it's going to be very difficult. I'm working very hard to support the development of these communities, but I'm hopeful because what I see around the world is I see parents stepping up, I see them organizing, I see them making the decision to bring their children home from school, even if it involves sacrifices, even if it involves a certain amount of civil disobedience, even if it involves moving out of a country, even if it involves facing down the authorities, which is hard to do. But I see this happening in many countries around the world, and that gives me hope that parents have said enough. We've had this experiment of government-controlled education for our kids for 150, 200 years, however long, in whatever country, and they're not happy with it. I think there is a very bright future for home education, and I think that spells a bright future for every community where homeschoolers exist. We need to connect with other like-minded individuals because together we can achieve a lot, right? Team. Together everyone achieves more. There is strength in numbers, and that's what the homeschool movement in the United States has shown is there is strength in numbers, and it doesn't take a majority to prevail. We're a minority of people, even back in the 80s and the 90s, as we were fighting these legislative battles, these court battles, we were a tiny fraction of the population. Everybody else had their kids in private or public school, and we were this tiny little minnow swimming against the tide, yet we were able to prevail. Well, that means, in my mind, that other people can also prevail in other countries. You know, when you get together, you are empowered, you're encouraged, and you know, that's really what we need. That's what all homeschoolers need. You see the importance of the support group networks. You see the importance of the state organizations who are working hard to provide parents with the information and the resources that they need. And that's what we can do in groups. Groups are very important to homeschooling, the act of homeschooling, but the groups are also important to maintaining the freedom that we have. We can work together to preserve our freedom. So groups serve very important purposes. And you, if you're a group leader, a support group leader or a state group leader for a homeschooling organization, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. What you are doing is important. It makes a difference. So as a Christian, I believe that God has a purpose and a plan for everyone. And we do not need to fear anything. We can be confident that the God who created this universe has a plan and purpose for us, for you, and for everything that's happening around us. Romans 8:28 says that all things happen for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Because why? If you go on into Romans 8:29, it says he wants to shape our character. And so everything that happens to you, to me, in the world around us is part of God's plan, and it's about developing our character, and it's about accomplishing his purposes in the world. We're all unique, created by God for a plan and a purpose, and we can all have an impact in the world around us. Homeschool mom, you are having an incredible impact in your family. Mother Teresa is someone who is pretty famous. She was once asked, what can we do to achieve world peace? She said, go home and love your family. Well, I believe that that's exactly what homeschooling parents do, especially you homeschool mom and dad who are there, homeschooling your children. You are showing love on a daily basis to your children. And when we create a community based on love, an environment of love for our children, they take that love and they go out into the world when they grow up, and they are then agents of God's love and the love that you put into their lives by investing in them and by homeschooling them. You're having an impact. You're having a generational impact by investing in your children with love, with attention, with time. And those are the things that all children need. If you're interested in resources on how you can do more, if you want to get involved in this great endeavor to advocate for and defend freedom, I encourage you to get involved in a support group. Get involved in your local support group. If you are called to exercise more leadership, contact your state organization and see if they need some help. State organizations are always looking for people who have vision and leadership ability to serve the homeschooling community. You may be able to step up and serve as a leader in your community in a position of authority, perhaps getting elected to a school board or a county commission or a state legislative office. You can have an impact on the community around you in many, many ways. So my encouragement to you is get involved, whether it's more involved in your family or more involved in your community. Together we can all make a difference and advance freedom. You may feel like you're the only homeschooler in your community. You may be listening and you're from another country and you don't know any homeschoolers. I can tell you this, there are homeschoolers everywhere, even if there aren't many of them. And you can go to our website, hslda.org, and go to our international page. If you are in a country where you're not sure where there are any homeschoolers, we have 80 countries with contacts you can find out. And if you can't find one, you can email me at international@hslda.org, and we'll work to find someone in your country to connect you with. If you're in the United States of America and you're feeling isolated, you can go to hslda.org. We have a group locator. And you can find a group right there in your area. In the homeschooling community, we have no reason to be isolated. We're human beings, right? And we do need that personal connection, and you can find that. You can find it. Go to hslda.org, check out our group services page where we have lists of thousands of groups that are all over the country, all over the world, where you can connect with. And I invite you to join HSLDA, join us and support our work advancing homeschool freedom here in the United States and all over the world, where we partner with and support homeschool communities seeking to do the same thing that we're doing here, advance our freedom, protect our freedom.